I've always said, look at other people's newspaper. And I always look at sort of the newspapers from Ireland, France, Germany, Netherlands, and even America to see are there stories about the UK? What's their take on essentially the absolute the absolute craziness going on in the UK? And it can be quite good to see someone else's outside take of the UK. But one of the things we've had for many years, especially since the 80s, really, was Margaret Thatcher pushed our economy away from being one based around industry towards finance. And that has had a lot of very negative effects for, well, the rest of the economy because you cannot run. And then, not everyone in the UK can be a banker. It's that simple. Not everyone can just, be that. You have to have other things. And the Conservatives, for years, have gotten away with the fact that London has become very much that economic driver of the UK. But unfortunately, the effects of that have now started to really hit the rest of the country, and especially through COVID, the 2008, financial crash, which, bear in mind, bar sort of London, the rest of the country is still feeling the effects of, and a lot of the North in particular, still feeling the effects of the miners' strike and the closing down of the industry around those pits. So there are a lot of deep rooted problems, something which even the Levelling Up white paper said, yeah, there are these problems. And then, of course, they didn't go on to either fix or address those problems. So we got some problems. We got some crises stacked upon crisis, and oh boy, we are we are in for, I think, a wild ride because I think you are going to see, um, prediction wise, I think you're going to see other economies just start to take off, and the UK is just going to lag behind, if not start to take some serious downturns in some areas. And of course, this goes back to years and decades of, well, just poor economical management by the Tories, just focusing laser sighted on financial services. And rather than having an open economy, pushing for Brexit to create a far more closed economy. And historically, closed economies don't do very good. So today we're going to go over to the Atlantic to have a look at what they see as, well, how the UK is becoming one of the poorest countries in Western Europe. And it's not really hard to, well, disagree with, to be honest. So before we go diving into that, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. So, as we said, we go to the Atlantic, the title of How the UK Became One of the Poorest Countries in Western Europe. So, the past few months have been rough for the United Kingdom, and that's putting it lightly. That's putting it very lightly. Um, Energy prices are soaring, national inflation has breached the double digit, and the longest serving British monarch has died, and the shortest serving prime minister has quit. You probably knew all of that already. British news is covered very amply, some might say too amply, in American media. Behind the lurid headlines, however, is a far deeper story of a decades long economic dysfunction that holds lessons for the future. And that is really true. We are having such big economic problems, but the Tories just don't really seem to want to do it. The levelling up idea, the fact that we've now got a levelling up secretary again under Michael Gove. Is it actually going to be done? No, because under Boris Johnson, they had to spend at least a set amount of money. They couldn't even commit to spending that money. And even the local council federation came out and said, well, if you're really committed to levelling up, the price tag of levelling up, because of, again, the government's actions, has gone up even more. So once again, we're going to be treated to some very pretty words, but in reality, it's not going to have a lot of actions. But anyway, back to it. In the American imagination, the UK is not only our political parent, but also our cultural co-partner, a wealthy nation that gave us modern capitalism and the Industrial Revolution. But strictly by the numbers, Britain is pretty poor for a rich place. UK living standards and wages have fallen significantly behind those of Western Europe. By some measures, in fact, real wages in the UK are now lower than they were 15 years ago and will likely be even lower next year. And not surprising, to be honest. But this is something Labour really needs to fight on and start really pointing this out, that people's standards of living and wages have been driven down under this Tory government, or well, these Tory governments, shall we say. But anyway, back to it. So this calamity was decades in the making. After World War II, Britain's economy grew much slower than those of continental Europe. By the 1970s, the Brits were having a national debate about why they were failing behind, and the former empire had been relatively insular and sleepy economy. Under Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s, markets were deregulated, unions were smashed, and the financial sector emerged as a jewel of the British economy. Thatcher's injection of neoliberalism had many complicated knock-on effects. But from the 1990s to the 2000s, the British economy roared ahead, with London's financial boom leading the way. Britain had got rich as the world's factory in the 19th century and had become the world's banker by the 21st. When the global financial crisis of 2008 hit, it hit hard, smashing the engine of Britain's economic ascent. Wary of rising deficits, the British government pursued a policy of austerity, ferreting about debt rather than productivity or aggregated demand. The results were disastrous. Real wages fell for 6 straight years, and facing what writer Flanino II called the dull anxiety of declining living standards. Conservative polls sniffed out the boogeymen to blame for this very slow motion catastrophe, and they served up a very anxious voters a menu of scary outsiders, bureaucrats in Brussels, immigrants, asylum seekers, anybody but the actual decision makers who would kneecap the British competitiveness, and a cohort of older, middle class, grieving, nostalgic voters demanded Brexit, and they got it. In the past 30 years, the British economic chaos, the British economy chose finance over industry. Britain's government chose austerity over investment. The British voters chose a closed and poorer economy over an open and more richer one. The predictable results are falling wages, stunning low productivity and growth, and although British media does worry about robots taking everyone's jobs, the reality is closer to the opposite. Between 2003 and 2018, the number of automatic roller car washers, that is, robots washing your car, declined by over 50%. While the number of hand car washers, that's men with buckets, increased by 50%. The economist Duncan Walton told me in an interview for my podcast, Plain English. It's more like people are taking all the robots' jobs. That may sound like a very quirky example, because of the British economy is obviously more complex than blokes rubbing cars with soap. But it's a very illustrative case. And according to the International Federation of Robotics in the UK, the manufacturing industry is less technological and automation is only about a similarly to rich country. Barely even 100 robots installed per 100,000 manufacturing workers in just 2020. Its average robot density was below that of Slovenia and Slovakia. One analysis of the UK's infamous productivity puzzle concluded that outside of London and finance, almost every British sector has lower productivity than its Western European peers. And again, productivity is a serious problem. And we're just going to stop there because honestly, it's a fantastic article. Like I say, go read the rest yourself, but it gets right to the point. Gets right to the point of what our real problem is. We're having a serious productivity problem because we have not invested in skills. We have not invested in, modernization. And just like we were the first country to sort of industrialize many, many years ago, we aren't following on from that. There is no economic strategy. There is going to be no leveling up because Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt will not fork out the money to do it. So, as much as Rishi Sunak says he wants to go back to the 2019 manifesto, the 2019 manifesto was written, I think, in a completely different time and mindset. One that Rishi Sunak is going to have to do a lot of things to really at least trying to get to grips with the economy that many conservatives are just going to say, well, that wasn't in our manifesto. That's not that. And I think he will find himself having to go to a general election. I really think he will. That's the ultimate destiny of it, I think. And it's insane how you've got, again, the Atlantic pointing out we have a massive productivity problem. And it is one of lack of investment. The drivers about behind this have very much been the Tories, focusing rather on the financial sector rather than the industrial sector. The the answers are there plain to see. And just as in the 1970s, where we had a national conversation about why our decline is happening, I would hope, I would hope that this would generally kickstart a conversation about why we are having such a national decline now, preferably sooner rather than later. Because one of the key things is certainly going to be reversing Brexit, rejoining the single market customs union, and eventually rejoining the European Union. That is an automatic yes. Because the people who are responsible for our awful, sluggish economy isn't the EU. It has been the people driving the helm of this. And that has very much predominantly been, well, the Tory party. So, again, this is something that Labour desperately needs to get a hand on. And I think putting forward a good industrial strategy, which to be fair, they have done. Their green strategy of like kickstarting a green revolution, I quite like it. And again, I want to see that in their manifesto. I want to see more details, how far it goes, what money they are prepared to really spend on kickstarting this green revolution that they talk about. I think it will be very good to see more details and how the building of a proper industrial strategy can really drive forward Britain's economic growth and get us completely out of this slump that we are in, because no one can deny we are in a serious slump at the moment. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, we'll see you all next time.